Hello guys and welcome to the channel. In this first episode we're going to be having a look at the Church of St Stephen Walbrook in the City of London. So without further ado, let's just get straight into a time lapse. So we're just going to start out this build by laying out a basic floor plan of different coloured wool, and I find that sometimes I like to use floor plans and sometimes I just go off of Google Maps and images and scale doors and windows off of that, and I find that works slightly better for me. It works better depending on the situation. So you may find that you need to use floor plans, or you may find that you need to use Google Maps, or a combination of both. And the reason we're using different coloured wools as opposed to just going straight into using regular blocks is that we can go in later on and brush them with World Edit, and this allows us to create this patchy effect on the walls where the stone has deteriorated and degraded over time, hasn't necessarily been restored. And I find that that's the way that I find it easier to do. If you find it easier just to go straight into blocks, then you do whatever's best for you. But this is the way that I like to do it because it creates a more random look with the stone. So we're just going to keep going round until we reach the desired height of the walls, and you can see I'm starting to put in cut sandstone for the windowsills, and that allows us to just create a bit of variation in the texture to show that they are two distinct elements. There's a definite divide between the windows and the doors. I'm just going to keep going around, just leaving in the gaps for the doors and the windows. And the way that I like to do my door and window frames is I like to use retextured birch trapdoors from the WBC Builds texture pack. And if you haven't already, I'm going to leave a link down in the description on how to get that, as it's incredibly useful for creating builds such as this. So if you've never used this method of construction before, it can look quite weird with the different coloured walls instead of blocks. However, it always comes together very quickly. And once you get used to blocking out all of the shapes with wool, it becomes second nature. So I'd really recommend trying out this new method of construction. So we're just starting to block out the roof with orange wool, and this means that we can then go in later and paint it with stone and andesite to make it look like a lead roof. I'm just going to use a bit of World Edit just to speed things up a tiny bit. And as you can see, we're just starting to leave in gaps for the main window round on the east side of the church. And now the ornamentation over the front door I found was easiest to achieve with walls and slabs, but you'll get a better look at that later on in the video. So one way that I like to create relief masonry, like you've just seen me do on the tower and a section of the wall there, is to use those retextured birch trapdoors, and that helps to give a bit of depth to the build and separates them from the cornices that we're going to do later on in the build, where we're going to use stairs for those. So this bit of the build can sometimes be a bit tedious as you're just going round and round and just filling in the walls with those different coloured walls. However, it does get more interesting the further up the church you go, and you can see that we've just used the different coloured wool to get that patchy effect on the wall. So you can see on that wall in the front we've got a section of cyan wool, and we'll paint that later to give a different coloured stone. And now we're just going around and just adding in the gaps for the elliptical windows in the top section of the church. And you can see that I've just gone around and added in that front section of roof over the porch. So for these elliptical windows in the top section of the church, you can use trapdoors to create a gentler, more rounded shape for them. And if you place those between two stairs, it creates an almost perfect elliptical shape. And that you can see that's what I've done now, and we're just going around and just doing that to every single window that applies to. And if you expand that to a 3x3 square, you can make a almost perfect circle out of trapdoors and stairs, and that works really well for creating the more circular windows and for the top of more arched windows. And that's a technique that you'll see me use a lot in my church buildings. So you can see at the back there we've used sandstone walls as the tracery for the east window, and that's something that helps just create a bit of difference between the windows. So obviously that has thicker tracery, so we've used sandstone walls to represent that. And as we get nearer to the lower roof line, we're just going to go around and just outline the main sections of the roof with wool. Then we're going to add in some orange wool with World Edit, and just keep the colours consistent throughout the build so that we know what to paint what later on in the build. You can just see we're just adding in that cornice that I was talking about earlier with upside down stairs and leaving in the gaps for the semicircular windows on the top section of the church. So just going around and adding a small parapet, again keeping the colours consistent with everything that we've done so far. I'm just going to go around. And now we're going to use a different coloured wool for the section underneath the dome. As you can see, that it's a slightly different colour between what we've got as magenta wool and what we've got as the lime wool. And we can use this later on to paint it a different colour, and this just helps us to distinguish between those different sections of the building and just makes it slightly easier to keep track of. So we're just going to keep going around the walls and the tower until we reach the beginning of the dome section, and then we'll split it off into focusing on the dome and then focusing on the spire section of it. So you can see we're just going around and leaving in the gaps for the half-arched windows, and we're just putting in the cut sandstone just to act as the window sills there. And you can see that we've started to build up the main frame and tracery for those semicircular windows on the sides of the church. And you can see that in that photo that I've put up on the screen. So some people may wonder how to scale things correctly, and one thing that I find easiest to do is to start with a door or something on the ground floor where you can generally find pictures of people walking past the building, and then from there you can kind of roughly scale off the rest of the building components off of that. And that's useful for, especially when it comes to the upper floors, you can use what you've done on the ground floor to then scale off the rest of the building. So here you can see I've generally gone for 3 wide windows, and that allows you to create the arches at the top. We're just going around now and just adding in the tops of those arched windows on the section underneath the dome. And again, we're just using the same techniques that we've been using throughout this building. Nothing too complicated. It's all relatively simple building techniques, but it comes together to create this wonderful looking building. We're just going to go around and just finish up this layer on top of the windows, and then we're going to start prepping the area to put the main roof on. So you can see we're just going to use a tiny bit of world edit here and just to speed that process up. And again, we're just using orange wool just to keep things consistent with what we've already done. And we're starting to add in that top cornice underneath the dome, and we're just going to keep doing this until we've covered the whole area with orange wool and a cornice. So with the cornice, it doesn't need to be particularly heavy, it just needs to be exactly the same as we've done previously, just a layer of upside down stairs, and that's just enough to distinguish that there is a cornice there, but it's not a particularly heavy one. So we've just created the parapet for the roof, and now we're actually going to start laying out the roof. So this is where the fun begins. So we're just going to use stone at the moment, just to give the effect of a lead roof. And it's easier to actually use stone blocks here, just that you can roughly map out the roof shape and actually use slabs. And the reason we're going to use slabs is that it provides a more gradual increase in the gradient of the roof than using stairs or full blocks. And you can see that we've started to outline the base of the dome in prismarine bricks, and the prismarine bricks provide this really nice copper colour, because obviously I haven't updated to 1.17 yet, so I'm not using copper here, I'm going to use prismarine instead, and in my opinion prismarine does look slightly better. As you can see, we've now started to build up the roof shape to where it's recognisable, and we've started to get that gradual increase that we were looking for with using the slabs and the full blocks. And it's important that you experiment with what you think looks best. I normally use stone and andesite here, I've just used stone. We're just going around now and just creating the base of the dome, and I think it's time that we focus just on the dome. We'll come back to the tower and the spire and finish that off later. So you can see that the dome is relatively small, and it's actually one that Wren based off his original designs for St Paul's Cathedral. So if, like me, you've always struggled with creating domes and cones, then I used an online voxel shape generator that I'll leave a link to in the description, and that's really useful for creating shapes like this. And I would highly recommend that if you're struggling to create them, that you use this tool, as it's really easy to use. Just going around now and just starting to finish off the dome and just get ready on that top section of it. So it comes to the top relatively quickly, and then we build the lantern on top of that. And that's what we're doing now. We're just giving a solid base that we can now start building that really beautiful lantern on top of. And this is a technique that I use in pretty much all of my church builds. If you want to simulate the iron or the lead tracing on a window, use iron bars with glass blocks behind that, and that creates this really nice effect. And now we're just going to add a small weather vane on top, like you can see in the real life reference, and we're just going to use the debug stick to give a bit more depth and dimension to that. With that, the dome is finished, and it's now time to focus on the tower and the spire. So, in my opinion, the spire is one of the most interesting parts of this church. No one actually knows who designed it. It came out of the Wren office, however there is speculation that it was actually designed by Nicholas Hawksmoor, as the spire was not actually added until 1713, by which time Hawksmoor had been working for Wren for almost 30 years. Just going to use those retextured birch trapdoors just to act as the arch frames for the belfry section of the tower. And in order to create the belfry shutters, you can do several things. You can use slabs, or you can use stairs, or whatever you think works best. In my opinion, dark oak stairs on top of one another create a perfect belfry shutter layout. It looks slanted, and it gives this nice effect without being too blocky. But you can do whatever you think looks best. So we're just going around now and just adding in a double layer of slabs, and this just creates a double heavy cornice that simulates the top of the tower and the beginning of the spire section. And the spire section is really intricate with all of these different levels of depth, and it's a really lovely design spire. So we can create the banister rail using fences that we're going to debug later, and you can use walls to create different depths within the same level of spire. So we're just going to double stack walls here, and these can be debugged later to create these really thin and perfectly scaled columns. And you can see we're just adding in those different cornices just to create different levels within the spire. And as we're getting up to the top, it obviously gets thinner, so it's really important that you just scale that gradually so that you don't end up with this really awkward looking spire. As we're moving down the spire and just using the debug stick just to get the different effects that we want, you can see that we've now created that layer with the two columns next to each other, and how well it works when you actually use the debug stick and take the time to go back around and use it. And with that, it's complete, and it's now time to paint. So we're going to use stripped oak and oak planks for the dark sections of stone, and then we're going to use a mix of stripped birch, birch planks, and sandstone for the lighter parts of stone. And if you use the planks and the sandstone, it blends in the textures quite well. And now for the section underneath the dome, we're going to use strip jungle and jungle planks, as it's slightly different to the oak, but it's different enough to distinguish that they are two distinct building materials. So for the windows, we're going to use exactly the same techniques as we did on the lantern. We're going to use a layer of iron bars in front of glass, and this just simulates the lead tracing in front of the roof. And it can be used on cathedrals, it can be used on smaller builds, just to give that extra bit of detail. So you can see here what I've also done on the inside is I've also added a frame of smooth sandstone. Obviously this can be whatever material your building is made out of. I've just gone with smooth sandstone as that's what the exterior window frames tend to be. And you can see that that just prevents any ugly gaps from showing when you're looking at this building from the outside. So in real life the area underneath the dome is actually completely open. However, I've not got rid of the roof section that we did earlier, as I'm not really planning on doing an interior to this. I don't tend to do interiors on my builds, but if that's something you guys want, then please let me know down in the comments and I'll see about doing that. So just going around and just finishing up the windows on the ground floor, and that wraps up the build for this episode. So I really hope that you guys have enjoyed watching this. and there's plenty more to come. But without further ado, I'm just going to leave it here and leave you guys with a short cinematic that I've made of this build. Alright guys, so that wraps up today's episode of Wren Meets Minecraft. I really hope that you guys have enjoyed watching this video, and if you didn't, let me know in the comments what you didn't enjoy and what I can improve on. If you did, remember to like, subscribe and click that bell icon so that you can be notified when I upload a new video, and be assured there are plenty more to come. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, I've been Lord Goblin. Goodbye.